Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So Jim, you've been a 4-time CRO, and now you advise and consult for many tech companies. And when you look back on your selling career, are there like one or two big key learning moments or sessions that you remember as pivotal points in your career?
There are. It's probably early in my career, very early. My first job out of school was at IBM. And I thought I wanted to go from Madison to, I wanted to go work at one IBM Plaza in downtown Chicago. And I made it about halfway to Rockford, Illinois. That's where I was recruited to go to a relatively small branch, over 100 people in that branch in Rockford. Wasn't my ideal selection, but it's where they recruited me to. And when I look back, John, that was a big blessing in a few things on how I learned to start to sell. And what was interesting about it was if I would have gone to one IBM Plaza in downtown Chicago, like many of my friends who I met throughout my first year of training, those people were part of teams. They might have been on the Sears team, or they might have been on one of the bank's teams. And then I might have been relegated to maybe the IBM printer specialist or one part of the IBM product line. And that's how those folks developed and grew their career. For me,
what you're saying is then if you were part of a team, then almost like they used to call the Oracle bus, like that whole team gets off and calls on Sears or some of the other big companies, and you never really get to control or understand the entire sales process because you're just one member of a big team.
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah.
Correct. Yep. As you can imagine, back in the days, there was, there's the senior account exec, that you had to pay deference to, and they had that account for 10 years, and
right.
You had to earn a right to, take on. So it was one scope of responsibility. And then the other part was you only learned one part of the IBM product line. So you were very focused, and you were a specialist in that particular area of the product line. For me, this was a relatively small manufacturing kind of base of companies in Northern Illinois and Southern Wisconsin. I immediately, when I started my training, which was full 9 months at IBM before you took on a quota, I was immediately attached to one of those account execs, a more senior person who had been there for some years. And those people owned those accounts, but they didn't have a big team. So they actually embraced me to come in and kind of be their junior rep. And then it was only as quickly as possible that I could take those accounts over myself. So back to your question, when I really look back at my career, that gave me a couple things at a very young age. One, it gave me a big level of responsibility. Most of them were IBM customers already. So I had to step in and bring something to the table in terms of knowledge. They already had a salesperson or an account exec, a senior most person. But I had to bring something to the table. So I prided myself on really learning all of our products. It was difficult because, as you can imagine, IBM had a very broad product range. So I had to learn a lot of the products very quickly if I wanted to sell something. I couldn't rely on anybody else. But the most impactful thing was it gave me a hunting license with my IBM card. And that gave me the confidence that I could go into any of my accounts and I would immediately call very high or at the top most of those companies. I vivid recall not being beholden to what we called the data processing people, right? Those were the typical IBM friends, supporters, making all the decisions, whether it was mid-range, mainframes, software, printers,
What
storage.
made you want to do that? What made you want to call high versus just calling on all the IBM friends, so to speak?
Yeah, two things. One, immediately when I saw some of these, in all fairness, some of the folks that were running their data processing organizations, those were interesting people, but that's not where I really wanted to spend all of my time. It was helpful to sell the IBM products, but I didn't know much about the customer's business. So I wanted to learn more about it. So I was always fascinated. I'm an engineer by schooling, but I went right into sales. But I've always been fascinated by how these businesses run. So I felt that I had the right to go call on higher level folks to find out how their businesses run. It just didn't occur to me that I would be stuck in the lower levels of the building or in the basement where the IBM equipment was all stored. It was interesting to me. I spent a good amount of time there, but I was either walking in the door or walking out the door. I felt all I did is just ask, could I go and drop my card off at the executive assistant in the Maple corridor or one level up where the CEO of these companies were or the CFOs were. So
Yeah.
back in those days, I was allowed to walk the halls and I would go introduce myself. I would hand them my business card and I would ask permission if I could come back at some point and perhaps introduce myself to the CEO of my companies. And so I did that when I was 25 years old.
Yeah, and you would have never had that opportunity if you went downtown and was on one of those teams.
Never. I wouldn't have been allowed to.
Right, right. Only the person that ran the strategic account team could do that, right?
Yeah.
Let's
And
talk about there's a couple of things you're talking about, Jimmy. You have the brand, and I started at Xerox, my career at Xerox, and I remember having that feeling. Like I opened up the newspaper one time, we competed against IBM on the printer side, and I saw nobody a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal. Nobody ever lost their job by making an IBM decision. And so you have these companies where you have a brand, but that helps you get in the door, but it's not going to make you welcome back. Like that's what I learned is that the Xerox brand helped me speak to a lot of people, but it didn't guarantee that I'd be welcome back. What did you learn about? Did you ever walk into a room and the person was there? Like, what did you learn that you had to do just beyond the brand? Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah, it was, well, the first step of the IBM sales process was establishing rapport. And we thought about that and we planned for it and we prepared ourselves. So my account execs, I remember two of them that I worked with that I knew I was going to work under them for a year of my training period, but then I was going to take over these accounts. So it was very clear that that was the plan. And so I would get some assistance from them. I remember two particular accounts. One, a guy named Bill, who was very suave and debonair. He had the nicest suits and he had the pocket protector. So Bill was ready to, gum chewing. He was the IBM quintessential IBM sales rep. And Renee was fantastic. She was a wonderful lady and she was very eager to help me ramp up. So both of those people, we sat down and prepared about how to establish rapport and what I could bring to the table. And so I took an interest in certain parts of the product line, of the IBM product line very early, and I learned those things. And I wanted to bring something of substance to these companies. So I remember very specifically Bill preparing me to go meet a guy named Joe Wilson, who was the CEO. And Bill was preparing me to make sure that when you're establishing rapport with Joe, make sure he's very proud of his rug and make sure you say that. And as you guys remember, you'd either look for maybe family pictures and maybe a golf memento or some type of thing to break the ice. And so Bill prepared me that Joe's very proud of his rug. You'll start talking very well, and he'll warm up to you very quickly when you get an opportunity to meet with him. I was invited in after that. I dropped my card off. I was invited in to stop by next time for lunch with Joe. And I walked into his office and he had hardwood floors and there was no rug in sight. And I looked up and he had the worst toupee you'd ever seen in your life.
Yeah. So now you're rattled. You were rattled now.
I had to very quickly adapt. But I would say IBM did prepare us for that. So I just kicked into my curiosity mode. And so back to the original question, that curiosity for me always started at the highest levels. I felt very comfortable and always have felt very comfortable asking questions just to learn. Tell me about the business. Tell me about how you arrived here. No different than we would talk to any of our sales reps that we're interviewing, but I would ask just curious questions. And I think that was unique. I don't think the other IBMers asked those kind of questions. I was young. And so I really wanted to learn. Plus, I was very interested in this case. Gilman Engineering was a new company. They were building robotics for the Saturn cars. And they had, when the plants were opening up in Tennessee, these guys got a contract to build all kinds of robotics. And I was fascinated by that. So I wanted to go right out on the shop floor. I wanted to learn all that stuff. And he felt that. And then when I met the other executives and I started to talk to them about doing some kind of IBM process audit to help them improve their manufacturing, it just kind of fell in line from that initial meeting. And that's how I would start my sales process and earn the right to continue to come back and discuss his priorities and report back to him how we were doing with his team. So it was a very unique circumstance, but to this day, 35 years later, I think about that often, and I continue to push myself to maintain that curiosity factor. And I'm not shy about talking to people at all levels in the organization. I feel like I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah. But one of the things that I want to highlight is that you were like you said, you were fascinated. So you were truly interested. You were genuinely interested, and people can feel that versus a lot of times salespeople going on sales calls and they're making like they're interested, and people can feel that also.
Yeah, and I think you got to prepare. You have, I had to learn, so when I was learning manufacturing resource planning, MRP back in the day, or now ERP as everybody knows about it, enterprise resource planning, you had to learn that stuff and you had to train on it. I would go to school on that and I would learn the ins and outs of how that stuff worked. And so being not only curious, but being committed to learn and, inventory management and how optimization works on the shop floor of these facilities. Those are opportunities that if you shy away from it and only, as you described, only being at a superficial curiosity level, that'll last you 1 or 2 meetings, but it won't get you invited back.
Yeah. Now, go ahead, Johnny.
What's interesting? I'm thinking about the background of all three of us and what a benefit we had. So, Johnny, I don't know if it was your first job, but I know you landed at HP early in your career.
Yeah.
Jimmy, you landed at IBM. I landed at Xerox. It's like, today when I'm talking to young sellers and the advantages of going to companies that have invested in sales training and sales process, and they understand their customers and why their customers buy. I also have a lot of conversations with people that they don't understand what they don't get, and they try to come out of college and go into a startup or go be a BDR somewhere and go, just pick up the phones and hang and bang. And what advice would you give people today on how to be a student of the game if you don't have a big company that invests, coming after you like that? Like, what advice do you guys have? Because you still have to be a student of the game. And we didn't have a choice when we started all three of those companies. We went to massive trainings. I went to training every year in Virginia. Every single year that I was with Xerox, I went to training. And I'm sure you guys did the same thing. What do you tell people now?
I had that conversation with all of my nieces and nephews who are in the high school graduation level to 30 some odd years old since last summer. And what I implored to each and every one of them was between last summer and Christmas time, when I'm going to see all of you guys again, that's 25 weeks. If you each put in 1 hour on YouTube learning about AI, 1 hour a week, no matter what you're doing, whether you love your job right now or you're going to pursue a different job, you have an opportunity pretty easily to completely separate yourself from your peers. Because I would say 95% of the people may start that, but they won't finish it. They won't put in 25 hours. It's boggling to me why they wouldn't do that. But knowing what we all know, that level of commitment of self-training or either employer-driven training, crucial for us to separate yourselves from your peers and put yourself in a position. And what I tell them, it's your choice. You either can do this and separate yourself and set yourself up for the future, or you're going to end up working for someone that did it.
Yeah, I think, Johnny, still there's companies like Oracle, Salesforce.com, ServiceNow, maybe even still today, IBM, HP, SAP, that still EMC, Dell still have really big training programs. And if you're coming out of college, you have a choice. You can just jump into a raw startup, or you can go into some of these companies that have very established training curriculums, and they train the hell out of you. And then, after you're there in a couple of years and you feel confident, you can get up and go someplace else.
Recruiting ground for other companies, startup companies will pull people out of there because they have that training. And Jimmy, but what you're saying too, you've got the ability to be uncommon today. No matter, like, even somebody that's like myself, taking that same advice, I had to go learn about AI. I had to go learn about data science. I'm just thinking about some of the big things of over the last few years. I had to go learn these things because the telltale for me was it started to come up for me when I was on calls with customers and in meetings, and they would bring something up that I didn't know, that I didn't understand. And it wasn't necessarily that they expected me to understand it, but I always said this. It's not, I walk out and I go, it's not a crime not to know, but it's a crime not to be doing anything about it. And no matter where you are, like the difference between us, how we started, we didn't have access to all that information. Literally, when I started, I did a lot of work in the library. I know people are going to laugh at me, but I'm talking about like 1985, 1986. When I started, I did a lot of work in the library. I wouldn't have to, I mean, I have all that at my fingertips today with like discovery and asking great discovery questions. And, I could do stuff on Chat GPT today. So there's multiple opportunities. You can either go to a company and get trained, or you could be extremely curious and find out what the critical mechanics are. Let's talk about some of those critical mechanics. Like, what would you learn today? What are they going to tell you? One of the things we're talking about is I learned at Xerox, no business issue, no business. That's something that they put into our head. And I was like, okay, so what does that mean? And I'd have a forecast for like changing out the copy center, the duplication center. And they'd say, what's the biggest business issue facing that company? And it was the greatest gift that Xerox gave me, is attaching what I do for a living to the biggest business issue facing a customer. And what they were doing in those print facilities is critical exchanges of information that if weren't done with the proper information on time, in the right places at the right time, it would bring that company to its knees. So that was one of the critical things I learned. Any other critical ones like that you would say to people?
There's so many interesting angles on that conversation. I think about it as you're only going to be able to capture the level of business metrics with the person that you're talking to. And you can talk to a data processing person and you can zero in on exactly what you just described, John, an example of speeds and feeds, as we used to call it. There was justification for buying new copiers from IBM or Xerox or an HP, and it was massive levels of business. People could make their quotas and people could earn a good living. So it's not meant to be a disparaging comment about certain levels of folks in the different organizations. There are business metrics for almost every level. As you move up, they become, for me, much, much more interesting, and then obviously much more potentially valuable or game changing for the business. And what you got to do is you got to start somewhere. And so become the best feeds and speed specialists if that's what you're going to do, but don't stop there and ask other questions. And so I think it's changed. Obviously, we all worked for arguably some top 10 companies that used to commit to the level of training that we were able to enjoy. But we all know that it's just a matter of how you implement it, all the way fast forward today to self-learning. But we use that same mentality, as I recall, when we all landed at PTC. Yep. We all know that we required at some point in our maturation, as part of the sales process, you must take a shop floor tour. In fact, we implemented that in the early 90s. Certainly we did it out in California, where I would demand people right after the demo, you ask if they would be willing to give you a quick shop floor tour. And as we know, 3 out of 4 times they either would say absolutely, or if not now, come back on your next trip. And we forced our salespeople out of their comfort zone. We did not hire, we were selling to mechanical engineers. We did not hire degreed mechanical engineers as salespeople. We hired salespeople. So I often and proudly tell any investors or any early stage companies, look, we could hire copier salespeople, and we all did, and Xerox salespeople. I have a list of our targets from 30 years ago, and we would teach those people how to sell to mechanical engineers by teaching them the problems that these people faced in their jobs, in their manufacturing. So early on, we taught and built confidence and showed them, like, this is really hard stuff. And so all the questions you're asking to learn, it's not to turn you into a mechanical engineer. We will pair you with a degreed mechanical engineer as an application engineer. That will be your partner. But you have the opportunity and the responsibility to go learn about that. But you don't have to be, and they don't expect you to be, a mechanical engineer. Engineers love to tell people about the problems that they're solving or they're intending to solve. So it was a natural transition in my experience from that learning mentality that I had at IBM, my curiosity to get out there on the shop floor and figure out what these guys are doing and why it mattered and what I could sell them. And then we transitioned that same mindset into our next career move at PTC.
Let's talk. You talked a little bit, Jimmy, about identifying metrics, which is a big topic for a lot of people as they go through MedPick and they want to build the cost justification. Some of the things that they really struggle with is, how do I truly identify metrics that are going to go into a cost justification? Do you want to touch on any of your learnings from that?
Sure. I think it goes back to the one thing I mentioned earlier is find out the level you're talking to, and you can capture those metrics. So early on, if you don't know anything about mechanical design and you're doing our 30-minute or 45-minute front demo of a hairdryer handle that we had, our can demo, but we would script it and we would teach us to stop. How long would that take you to do that, Mr. Drafts? And yes, we know that we would train and we would practice that. And before you know it, we've got reps that don't know anything about mechanical engineering, but they were very effective and their ability to do the demo. They'd seen the
And
demo.
asking basic quantification questions just based upon the reaction from customers.
Right. Great. He pushed that button. It took him 10 seconds to do that very complicated round on that handle. How long would that take you? It would take hours, or we wouldn't be able to do it.
But we have to
So
go to the one guy in this whole organization that knows how to use the software to actually make that happen. No one else can do it. Yeah.
So
correct.
what you guys are talking about, what I love is learning how to help people stand in their moment of pain.
Yes.
And I think PTC did that in such a great way. Jimmy, when they made us walk out on the shop floor, we immediately we're in, that's where reality was happening. There was scrap metal on the ground, and we could say, how often does that happen? What product line is that? Why do you have scrap there? What does that mean for the product? Who cares about that? What's the impact of time? When you can get out and see, touch, and feel. And so, man, I came from Xerox and I came to PTC. And in McMahon's great genius, he made me a manager without even selling software before or even selling Pro Engineer. So what I did, thank God, and somebody gave me the heads up, hey, John, go sit with an existing customer, spend a day with them. And I did. And I sat down next to somebody using Pro Engineer, and I'm like, so I remember when they did something and it looked like global find and replace on Microsoft. And the guy's looking at me like it's such a great, like, did you see that? Did you see that? And I'm looking at him like, oh my God, are you telling me that's highly differentiated? It looks like kind of like global find and replace, like a change made anywhere is reflected everywhere. And the guy goes, that's right. And he goes, oh, dude. And then he showed me how he used to do it. And if he was a design engineer, how would that get to the manufacturing engineer? And the answer was it didn't. And the manufacturing engineer would design something or manufacture something that didn't match the design, and then the stuff wound up as scrap. So, like, I guess the point I'm trying to make is there's three old guys on this show today.
Easy now, Johnny. Easy.
But what I'm saying is the things that we used to do are still the things that you have to do. They're just different environments. You
Yes.
have to understand, like Jimmy's saying, what was the problem that you're trying to solve? And now we're talking about metrics, and Jimmy's bringing up, well, how did you do that before? How would you measure that? And then taking it to the next level of metrics of just understanding how people are measured. Like I never asked that question at Xerox. When I got to PTC, I was asking everybody, how are you measured? And that their answers told me so much. I found out that people with power and influence knew exactly how they were measured. People without power and influence, sometimes they didn't have any clue how they were measured. And so measurement was also a reflection to me on whether or not people had power and influence inside the company. So sorry about being long-winded, but my point is all these things we're talking about, it doesn't matter whether you did this 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, or whether you're doing it today, you still have to be curious about these things. Right now we're talking about measurement.
Well, going back to something that Jimmy said earlier, and Jimmy, I want you to comment on this. I've been around Jim for a long time, and what Jim was really good at was, as he talked about before, he was fearless in going high. So he'd go high and figure out what some of the major pains were. And just armed with that quick information that he could get from, a high level, C-level type person, then he'd go down, or VP level, then he'd go down and try to get the details of it. But he knew he was onto something because he asked the right question at the top first. Then he went down and got the details. Jim, talk a little bit about that.
As you get more confident and knowledgeable, my mantra, obviously, knowledge builds confidence. Confidence turns into credibility. Credibility turns into enthusiasm. That turns into passion, and passion turns into persuasion. But the foundation is knowledge. And if you don't have the knowledge, you're kidding yourself if you're going to persuade people to do something at the top of the pyramid. So I think about that knowledge all the time. And I then, maybe as everybody said, maybe it's not a dumb question. I just want to understand it, like what really matters. And so One example that vividly connects calling high for me in metrics was when I went to Europe. And, we had a lot of customers doing various things, building mechanical objects and assemblies. But I went to Europe and I visited the president of a company called Kongsberg Offshore. And we were going to do a deal. All of our teams were aligned with their teams. We were showing them miraculous capabilities with regards to Pro Engineer. And we were driving towards getting our first $1 million deal out of Norway, first ever in PTC. Somewhere between the go, no go meeting, the benchmark, and the proposal, I met with this gentleman and I asked him, where does this sit on your priority list? And how important is this?
Keep going.
And I did that before I was asking him for the order. And he said, the reason I'm so interested in learning and seeing if you guys can do what you say you can do is because this is a huge problem for us. Kongsberg Offshore built oil well equipment. And as you can imagine and visualize, these are massive assemblies. And in this case, being dropped down anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 meters in the North Sea. And I was fascinated by it. And I wanted to understand that because I didn't know that much about oil exploration. And he explained to me that when we go out to put one of these wellheads in place, remember that we've been working on for perhaps years, designing, manufacturing, testing, ensuring that that thing works. When we'd go out to install one of those, the barge cost us $1 million a day.
Wow.
None of my guys told me anything about that when I asked them about what are the metrics. No, right? Their metrics perhaps would have been at a lower level of what they're talking to. So no one had told me that.
You
So
would
the
ask
first-
for a bigger deal too.
The second thing was like, we're not asking for enough money here.
Right.
And so this is just fascinating. And so you can even tell my enthusiasm 20 years later. They've been designing this thing. Now they got to put a barge out there, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million. They drop that thing down there. They're battling the weather. They're battling everything else. That barge is not just a boat. It's got a complete machine shop because they don't have the luxury if the thing doesn't fit together. And so he's describing this to me, and I cannot wait to get out of the room to go tell my team, like, you guys are doing a great job, but we have such a bigger opportunity here.
Right.
And so I got really fired up. It stuck with me to this day, and I thought, so obvious. And he said, if you guys can do what you say you can do, if we can drop that thing down there, and on the first try, because your software has simulated, if we can drop that thing down there, and that assembly will fit together perfectly with the right tolerances, the right seal, everything. You can imagine that how many millions and millions of dollars of savings that could be for a company like Kongsberg for one wellhead. So I've always thought about that. It was such a pleasant meeting, not just because I was the big dumb American in Scandinavia, but it was like we were at the most important issue that this guy's thinking about. Yet, we're selling mechanical CAD software with former copier sales reps. Wonderful, wonderful experience.
But it's also the extenuating circumstances around it, because a lot of times people would have just focused on how do you build it and what's the issues in building it. But it was the $1 million a day for the barge to get it out there, and then probably all the manpower he's leaving out. And that's where the big expenses were. And you're leaving that out of your cost justification.
Totally.
So, but if you didn't go ahead and get up high enough, you wouldn't understand some of the negative consequences of them not being able to make sure that thing works the first time. Great discovery, Jim.
And for me, the story, like, because you went high and prioritized the pain, you found that executive's metric or measurement for success was much higher than the operational level. The operational level is still important, and that's kind of like the technical level, where the technical level meets the business level is where those two worlds come together. And that's what you help them do, Jim. It's like This is what I say to people today, is that you have to operate in both worlds. You have to operate in the technical requirement capabilities level, and you have to operate in the business outcome level. When you do that, like you just said, Jim, and I'd love to hear this answer because, did you discount that software?
Absolutely not.
Why would you?
There was no
Million
reason.
dollars a day. This is the point I want to make here. And I know people are, their ears are probably hurting by I'm screaming in the mic here. But for me, when you do exactly what you just did, Jimmy, and you bring those two worlds together and you have measurements and metrics of success in the highest level of the organizations, your value gets exponential. Now, because you called high and wide, that you have the ability to go back up to that when people are trying to discount you and say, yeah, but we only have. Can you imagine the conversation at the operational level? Yeah, but we only have $200,000 to invest in software. And you're like, wait a second. If you don't do anything and it goes 3 or 4 days, that's $3 or $4 million. The point is, when you get into the world of metrics, measurable outcomes, and the higher up you go in organizations, the less likely you are to discount. Give me your feedback on that, guys, because I still see companies discounting the crap out of their software every single day.
I've been at the C-level where we have had a business issue, and the conversation between me and the CEO and the CFO basically goes like this. How much does it cost? Okay, make the problem go away. Do we even have budget? Not exactly for that. So make the problem go away and we'll figure it out later. But this is a problem at $1 million a day where that conversation probably went, it doesn't matter what it costs. Make the problem go away.
But I guarantee you somewhere, Jimmy, stay on this one. Somewhere in the conversation, people are actually telling them about budgets for software.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt on all fronts.
Encourage us, Jimmy. Encourage us. How do you, no matter where you are, how do you bring these concepts together and force yourself to go high? I call it the M and W. The M means you started low, you worked your way up in an organization, you get a hall pass, you meet the economic buyer, you come back down, and you're moving. W, like you talked about, is you go high and you get the economic buyer's prioritization, you then get the hall pass and move back down. So I don't care whether it's an M or W. The point is you got to bring those two worlds together. You guys agree with that?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think for me and for your listeners, it's simply just connecting the absolute connection between calling high, metrics, champion building, and driving urgency. So I think the urgency, lack of champions, if sellers are struggling, go back to your metrics. Where are you with your metrics? If you can't get the sense of urgency, you're not pinpointing the pain problem tightly enough. If you're not solving a problem that matters to people, you're unlikely to have strong champions.
Urgency comes from truly understanding the negative consequences of not solving the problem. In this case, if he didn't solve the problem, it might have taken him 10 days at $1 million a day. Whereas you solve the problem, it might take him 3 or 4 days at $1 million a day with the renting the barge.
Right.
And isn't it interesting that over 30 plus years, and now doing this for force management and teaching medic and medpic every day, the number one struggle for sellers in the data that we have is metrics. Number one. And it's, Jimmy, I like how you brought this to light here. It's so intricately, like for me, like when people get stuck at certain levels in an organization, they miss their own opportunity because they don't believe. So I also believe metrics is also proof. I believe metrics is twofold. It's not only the metrics that the measurement of success. I also believe it's your history of success and your proof points. It's where those worlds come together. It's what you've also done with people that have the same problems in similar scenarios and what they were able to do with it. It's where those two worlds come together, and therefore you build that, Jimmy, as you were going through that passion, and I missed one in there where I believe it creates belief. And if you believe what you do matters, I can immediately tell on sellers, If they believe what they do matters, they can help people inside companies get emotionally connected to what they do for a living matters. Because, and I believe that's what great sellers do today. They first of all believe what they do matters, and then they have the ability to get the people at the operational levels or the technical levels to get them emotionally connected to what they do for a living. In this case, in the barge, those people weren't considering the barge or the $1 million a day. They were considering maybe the how long it took for them to design XYZ. But they didn't even know that they were attached to that $1 million opportunity. Does that make sense? The people inside the company, and that's the best way to get champions, is to get them emotionally connected to what they could do for their own company.
Yep. And then just personally, that's how I navigated, as you said, John, going up and down in the organization, that I would make sure that the people in the other parts of the organization that weren't in those meetings, I would let them know that I told their boss's boss's boss about some of the things that they're able to do with our software. I acknowledged and recognized when they would offer me metrics, I would share with them that I'm putting that together as part of a story in terms of my cost justification. I'm going to give you credit. I'm just reporting on what you're telling me you're capable of doing if the company will buy this software for you. So it's funny when you mentioned, Mac, when you asked me about the pricing and stuff, I don't remember any examples of those executive meetings where people asked me for a discount. You think those engineering VPs cared about the price?
No.
If you're
Not at
solving
that point, not at that point they don't. And I wanted to highlight something that you brought up earlier, which is urgency. And this is something that a lot of salespeople leave out, especially with the 3 whys. Why does the customer have to buy? Why do they have to buy it from you? And why do they have to buy it now? So they find out the pain in the process. They understand how their differentiators fit into the process to help the customer. So they understand some of the positive business outcomes, but they never really dig deep on the negative consequences, which you just found out with this $1 million a day for the barge. And what I found is, like, in my selling career, I used to do the same thing in the beginning. I'd only understand what the pain was and how to solve the pain. And I really left out the urgency. And later on, I found out how powerful it is. So let's say I'm going to call Jim Drill. He's the executive. Hey, Jim, it's John McMahon from XYZ Company. Hey, John, I'm really busy right now. And I don't have any time. That's really difficult when you're not armed with the negative consequences to kind of create urgency. But if I say to Jim, hey, Jim, last week when we spoke, you told me that this barge that you're going to put this device on is costing you $1 million a day. And then Jim says, okay, I got 5 minutes. What do you got? And then what I found is the 5 minutes turns into 15 or 20 minutes, and I got what I wanted. But if I'm not armed with the negative consequences, I can't create urgency.
No doubt. Think about challenges that your listeners are having on end of quarter, getting the customer to respond, or going dark on you, or trying to wrestle it through procurement. Pick your pain points for sales. If you have had that conversation, you're in a completely different position. Pricing is not an issue. Timing is only a matter how quickly can we get this thing done, not can you please squeeze this in at the end of our quarter. It's like, we've got a problem. It's costing us $1 million a day. Can you guys get your act together and help us solve that problem? It's them pulling on you.
The other thing I like about this, it never stops. This attaching yourself to value never stops. And this happens more often than not. We bump into the $1 million, meaning they knew or somebody knew that it was attached to $1 million a day, but our sellers didn't even understand that. And so sometimes companies, they want our stuff more than we even realize, and we're not doing a good job selling. I just want to leave one point out there. I want to put this out there. I want people to write this down because I've talked about it for 30 years, and maybe a dozen people, and all the people I've stood up in front of at Force Management, maybe a dozen people have called me back and said, oh my God, that was brilliant. And so it just means that a lot of people don't try it. I call it a champion letter. No matter where you are, there you go. So you got to play where your feet are. Let's say you've already got a deal done this year, last year, whatever, This is what I mean by metrics and turning them into proof points. After you get your stuff in there, you still have the ability to go back in. Now you're a vendor in there. Now you're a supplier that's doing big things for them. And you can find out what the negative consequences, how those went away, or you can find out the business outcomes that got created. And I call it a champion letter. And I encourage everybody to do this. Pick an opportunity that you've sold, go back and make the connection to what you do matters and why it matters because you solved a critical business issue. Write a champion letter. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Executive, CEO, what have you, board member, what have you. I want to take the time to thank you for doing such a great job of outlining what your priorities were to your organization because I met with Jim and John and Ann and Susan, and they explained to us what that priority was. They explained to us what that $1 million a day was, or what have you. And your team, with our team, implemented a solution that did X, Y, and Z. And I just wanted to say thank you. And you'll have champions for life. Every time I've done that, that person who receives that letter, I did it one time to the CEO of a hospital that took care of my daughter with a life-threatening illness. It works on all facets of life. I wrote a champion letter for that doctor's team that took care of my daughter. That CEO wrote a personal letter to each person involved and copied the rest of the organization in and said, Dear Jim, thank you for understanding the vision of the company, blah, blah, blah. And then he had a challenge to everybody else. What are you doing? Everybody else in the company, what are you doing to impact our biggest goals? So my point is this, write a champion letter today. And if you can't do it, then you're vulnerable. It means your software or your solutions are in place and you don't know whether or not they're having a big impact. If you don't know the impact, you better find out because they're not going to be there for long because somebody's going to unseat you. Champion letter. I'm ready to go.
You're all fired up.
Let's go.
One, you and Grant and the team have obviously done an amazing job taking this training mindset that we talked about at the beginning of this and obviously impacting hundreds, perhaps thousands of companies in teaching this methodology. I think you guys deserve a huge amount of credit for that. It's so powerful that you guys have done that and impacted so many companies. I have all my little artifacts, so to speak, but you guys really turned it into a system. And what you said there, Cap, are a couple things that maybe your listeners can remember in addition to the champion letter. Mechanical engineering is mechanical engineering is mechanical engineering. IT is cybersecurity is pick your industry or wherever you're selling. And it is straightforward and everybody will be interested in your powerful storytelling if you can connect it to business metrics. It may not be directly applicable to that particular prospect, but you will build friends and open the door to people giving you insight into their business if you can tell those stories with real world proof points as you described. So I was able to then come back to the US and tell that story to Space Systems Loral, Lawrence Livermore National Labs, Raytheon, anybody, and they would immediately have interest because they knew that, I knew what I was talking about and our team could do something. So being able to capture that in your stories and having the confidence to then go on to the next one, those things are tied together tightly as well. And I think just maintaining that curiosity factor, even to this day, is so powerful and so interesting. It doesn't mean you know everything, but you have seen a lot. And perhaps some of the things that you've seen are applicable to their environment. And maybe we can help them solve that problem as well for them. So I think it's connected in that regard too.
Don't you have another story from ABB Transformers? You want to talk about that or no?
Yeah, it was, it's really just validating what we said earlier about, pricing, urgency, and the same type of thing. It was great. We could go to almost any industry and ABB was based in Sweden. In some respects, their corporate headquarters was in Zurich, but they had worldwide. And again, same type of opportunity. We had done a great job building champions. We'd worked, Cap, perhaps you remember those days. I think we had a couple locations in your neck of the woods. Yep. And so we worked as a team and we put together kind of a worldwide proposal that was based on certain pockets of success and metrics capture. And we were going for a large deal. It was the end of our year. I was leading the way because my team in Sweden had done the initial work, but it was a worldwide deal. I went down to Zurich to meet with the executives to see if I could get this deal done. The end of our year was September 30th. We had an incentive for our sales reps and district managers for deals that came in on the 15th of September, but not a day after. It was also probably at that time, I think it was the largest remaining deal for the quarter, multi-millions of dollars. So it was really important to the company. And I went down there. I thought we were very well prepared. We had our champions lined up. We had gotten, either naysayers isolated or under control worldwide, and everybody was relying on us to get the job done. I also, just on a side note, was leaving the next day for my own area review with this guy and the CEO of PTC for how's Drill's region doing. And so I was getting on a flight to go back to Boston, and I met the executives in Zurich. I had the same conversation. I said, why does this matter to you? And he said, we have 19 plants around the world at ABB Transformer that we're going to implement your software. And one of the things you guys showed us is that we could dramatically reduce scrap. Sounds pretty simple. It was one of the common metrics we would try to gather. Cap, you mentioned it at the beginning of this call. And I seem to recall it was somewhere in the range of 10% scrap at ABB Transformers. And I, being what I thought was a pretty smart guy, I just thought, is that like average, below average, better than average? Where are you trying to? He's like, well, let me tell you how I think about it. I basically have 2 plants with hundreds of people that come to work every day that pump out scrap. If I have 19 plants, I've got almost 2 full plants. That's how much it matters to me. It almost knocked me off my chair.
Two full plants are not working, essentially.
Everybody badge in, badge out,
produce
come
scrap.
in, healthcare benefits, buying materials, everybody working, but it's, in his mind, garbage. Go in the garbage. And I thought, same thing. We're not charging these guys enough.
Right.
I said, wow. And I said, now I had to kick in. So you guys comfortable with the proposal? We're comfortable with the proposal. We're comfortable with your implementation plan. Thanks for flying down to meet with us to answer our questions. And we're looking forward to proceeding. I said, can I just ask you a couple of questions? This guy here, Håkan, it's really important that he gets this order in for, and to be honest, he gets an incentive if we can get it done by the 15th. So if there's any possibility for us to get this deal done by the 15th, that would be really helpful to me. And just one other side note, do you see any problem with the paperwork or anything getting this done, by then, or certainly by the end of the month if you can't get it done by the 15th? No, there shouldn't be any problem. I landed in Boston. I was sitting waiting for my review with the executives at PTC, and over the fax machine came a $5.7 million order from ABB Transformers. I knew we had called at the right level. We had built champions, and through our metrics gathering, we had driven a sense of urgency that was beyond anything. Now they were personal. Now they knew they wanted to do something to help us. And it was a really, really impactful experience for me tying all these pieces together. And I've talked about that since that visit. And it also, Håkan got his bonus. My review lasted about 25 minutes, and then we just had lunch, and then I jumped on a plane and turned around and flew back to Stockholm.
Is you were working with ABB Transformer to basically make their engineering process and the way they built products a lot more efficient. And if I remember right, the VP of engineering reported to the VP of production for worldwide production. So the VP of engineering was thinking, again, more in terms of how do I engineer this product better? And because he could get rid of 10% scrap, that meant more to the VP of production who actually had to produce it, and then they were producing scrap. So they were on two different levels. If you only got to the VP of engineering, you might not have even got as big a deal as you did, because now when you got to the VP of production, his eyes were, in a sense, I always think that the higher up you go, they got bigger eyes. They see the world differently. And that VP of production saw the world different than the VP of engineering.
No
Hey,
doubt.
I got to make a comment here for both of you guys. And Jimmy, I got to repay the compliment. Thank you for the kind words about Grant and I really appreciate that. I want to make a comment about you and then the story. And I want sales leaders to listen to this. Jim, I've never heard of anybody who worked for you that doesn't, like, your army of people. They'll be the first one to raise their hand and say, I work for Jim Drill. So I work for Jim Drill. And the reason why I say that is you can tell in your stories you were involved and you still are involved. Like, if you're listening to this story, if you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to a leader that helped people get unstuck. The Holkins had Jim Drill right next to him. Jim wasn't the sales rep. Jim was the VP, and he was stuck in. Now, interestingly, John finished the story on ABB because he's the worldwide leader of sales who Jim was flying to see, and John knows the story about ABB. So companies, listen up. If you're not stuck in on what your people are doing, how they're doing it, how they're adding value to their companies, and you don't know the stories of how your people are helping people get unstuck, then you're at risk of keeping people, because the success tree, when Jim Drill goes from this company to that company and all these sales reps follow, and John McMahon goes from this company, I mean, they're good guys. I spent time with them. They're okay guys, but like, you help people make a lot of money. And if you're not getting stuck in at this level, I call it kind of like flying the desk. Like, if you're asking reps about a forecast and you don't know what the hell the business issue is, you can't help them get connected to the economic buyer. Just go back and replay this podcast, because this was done by a leader that was stuck in on opportunities and help people get unstuck. So that's my compliment back to you, Jimmy. I think you're one of the best that's ever done it.
No
Thanks.
doubt.
Appreciate it. We all know that we were responsible. We learned certainly from Mr. McMahon, but we were all responsible. You wouldn't last long if you didn't add value, no matter what level you were. Each of us were responsible for bringing something to the table. I think I recall my good friend, perhaps Jeremy Duggan, on here with you guys. You guys were talking, I believe, something around the difference between managing and leadership. I think Jeremy captured it really well in that, which, you know, he and I know each other well, and we're all from that same cloth. Like, leaders care about their people. And that's what I think I'm most proud of for us. Certainly John McMahon's legacy with all of the leaders that are out there today, and what you guys do, so powerful and so special, the impact that everybody has. And it's just these fundamentals of what we're talking about that we know is ingrained in us, and anything we can do to instill that in our people is hugely rewarding. And I appreciate that.
Amen.
Yeah. Hey, Jimmy, so let's talk really quickly. We've got a couple minutes left. You have been an advisor, a consultant for like 10 or 15 companies now. Can you just really touch on it at a high level? What are some of the common mistakes you see in these companies when you go in?
Sure. It's funny because sometimes on a daily basis, you pull your hair out because it seems so fundamental, but then I realize that's actually why I'm doing what I do and I enjoy it.
Right.
So I think I'm up to 17 first-time CEOs that I've worked, founders or first time, 5 as an operator myself directly, and then 12 in the last 10 years of folks that I've worked with. So I'm a little bit of glutton for punishment there.
Yeah.
And I think about that. Why am I that way? One, I think they struggle with this part of the business. They're founder-led sales, and they may be technologists. They may actually have their finger very specifically on a technical pain problem that they believe their technology can solve. But I don't think they have seen great sales leadership or salesmanship in their life. So they're blind to that. And so a common theme that I see is very specifically just asking about what's the business problem you guys are solving and why does it matter? And we all have our derivations of metrics gathering and uncovering, identifying the pain in our MedPIC methodology. But I just ask them, who cares? Who cares? It's just simple questions. What's the business problem? Why does it matter? Who cares in the organization? I ask those three things. I don't even get to like, okay, well, what's so special? Because if I ask them the next question, which we know we ultimately have to answer, what makes you guys so special or what's so unique about your particular approach?
Then it gets too technical.
They skip past
They love to talk about that, but they can't understand exactly what problem they solve. So a lot of times you see a lot of tech companies in the startups, I call it's a solution looking for a problem. They have no idea what the process is and what pains they solve in the process.
And so that's what I see, two common themes of one, they can't tell me specifically what the pain is that they're solving. And then they struggle with, well, who cares about that? And what are the consequences if they don't solve that problem?
If you can't talk about what the pain is, then you don't know who the persona is that you're supposed to sell to. So you can never build an ideal customer profile. That's your point.
And putting your message together and then all the things that flow from that.
And then from there, you can't put a sales process together because you don't know how they buy. You don't know the persona. You don't know the ICP. You don't know how to, it's a mess. But you see it all the time.
Yeah. So I just really try to guide them on, okay, let's start with whether they have someone who is leading their sales organization or they're searching for someone. Let's talk about what success you've had so far. Explain to me if you have a few customers or you're early in your go-to-market strategy and finding your product market fit. Explain to me what success you have. And what I'm telling you, the sales leader, their job is, in my words, to come up with the formula for success. And so when I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, or I may talk to some of your prospects or customers, is I want to understand what was the formula for success. Was it technically led, or did you understand the business problem such that you were able to find champions? But you got to start somewhere. And many of them, even though they may have some customers, there's no pattern matching. There's no sitting down and being very specific about what, who are we targeting? What do they care about? All that persona definition, it's missing.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. Like, Johnny, you called the three whys. Why buy anything? Why buy anything now? And why buy anything from you? I call it, or it's a variation of that, I call it the four essential questions. What problems do you solve for your customers? How specifically do you solve the problem? Then, even with their own customers. So how they do it isn't even the same. And so they're vulnerable because they can't repeat their own sales process or their own delivery process. So how specifically do you solve the problem? How do you solve it differently or better than anybody else? And where have you done it before? No matter what stage you're at, you have to answer those four essential questions.
I have one more quick story if we've got time.
Do it. Let's wrap up with one more story.
No matter what industry you're selling in, I pride myself and have gotten a number of compliments on my ability to be diverse in the different industries I sell. And I learned a lot when I first started to sell into the security space 23 years ago. And I subsequently did that a couple more times. And what you just said there, Cap, was obvious. If you go to RSA in Moscone Center, there's 1,000 10-foot by 10-foot booths, all a bunch of little birds trying to get a worm and trying to get above the noise. And then you've got 10, some ad tech, RSA, you got the big boys with the big booths, but the rest of the little chickens are trying to get above the noise, and they're not all directly competitors. And so everybody, as you said, Cap, everybody's got their own little angle on how to sell into the security world. And as we all know, the threat vectors are coming, new ones every day, and it's a constant chase to keep up from these people. When I went to meet the Chief Information Security Officer at First Data in Dallas, early on in my career at Imperva, I knew we were onto something. I knew we had fantastic technology. We sold web application firewall and database security. I knew we were onto something, but I also had experienced deals that were slipping. We weren't as tight on our ability to capture metrics in that world. Some of those people won't tell you what the metrics are because for obvious reasons, the banks won't discuss that. You can't put monetary dollars. You can only guess. So you're a little bit limited with one arm behind your back in the security world because you can't gather that and they won't share that with you. So I was trying to figure out when things get to the CISO, where do they go sideways? How can I figure out how to do that better? And this gentleman was awesome. And I went in there with a curious mindset. He was already using our product. It was a matter of us doing a broader deal at First Data. And I asked him, how do you see these things? Because I'm sure I'm one of a bunch of salespeople that tell you if you don't buy their stuff, you're going to lose your job. And we both laugh about it. He said, a lot of people, even my own company, don't understand. Everybody wants me to be a firefighter. I'm not a firefighter. Fires are going to happen. I'm a forest ranger. My job is to make sure the whole forest doesn't burn down. And some people get really uptight and they get really angry with me and they get mad that there's a fire over there and you need to fix that problem. No, I don't. Fires are going to happen. My job is to make sure we don't burn down structures. We don't burn the whole forest down. And so that was 20 years ago. It's sad, obviously, in today's world that we've had some fires, but it was a very powerful conversation that I had with him and totally changed the way I thought about these folks. I had to do a better job differentiating our solution versus some other solution, not a direct competitor. He said, we like your stuff. I had to just keep up and dig deeper on the metrics gathering to ensure that other prospects recognize that we're not chasing fires. We're solving a much bigger problem, and we have the ability to identify threats early on before they become a fire in your forest. And so it did change my mindset, but it goes right back to forcing my team and me to dig deeper on better understanding the real business problem and how the executives looked at it. Like John said, they have bigger eyes than even sometimes your champions.
Yeah. Great story, Jim Drill.
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Great to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Peace,
you,
brother.
John Kaplan, and thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.